Most people divide reverse searing into two steps. The low and slow cook that heats these steaks to a perfect doneness, followed by a really hot sear to make them delicious. By dividing and conquering, the reverse sear technique promises a perfectly cooked steak without the need for split-second timing. But the reverse sear is not as set it and forget it foolproof as sous vide. You absolutely can overcook your steak if you're not paying attention. A lot of folks say you should reverse sear a steak in an oven or a grill set to around 225 to 250 degrees Fahrenheit. But what if I told you that the temperature your grill gauge is measuring is a lie, and that there are actually 3 hidden steps in the reverse sear that almost no one notices? Sounds like bullshit, right? Let me explain. I've said it before, but your steak is mostly water with some shit mixed in it. The 34 ounces of meat in this ribeye steak contain about 3 cups of water. Really. As this steak cooks, all its water heats up and about 6 tablespoons worth evaporate from the surface. About 40% of the heat of cooking goes into raising the steak's temperature up to the final doneness. The other 60% is spent vaporizing that water from the steak as it cooks. As the water turns to steam, it's pulling heat out of the steak, leaving the surface much cooler than the air around it. This is evaporative cooling in action. It's why sweating cools you off on a hot day like today. It's also why the temperature your steak feels as it cooks inside a hot grill is much cooler than what a thermometer measuring the air temperature inside your grill will read. How much cooler? It depends. Meat actually goes through 3 steps during the low and slow cook of a reverse sear: warming, stalling, and rising. And the true cooking temperature of the meat is different at each step. Control these, and you'll have total control over the reverse sear. Here's the technique I like to use. If you've watched my channel before, you already know that I'm going to use the wireless predictive thermometer that I've built with my team at Combustion Inc. But if you don't have one, no worries. An instant read or a wired thermometer can be used to do the job. I'll insert the thermometer parallel to the direction I'll slice this steak in later. This way there won't be a hole in each slice. The predictive thermometer has 8 sensors for total temperature awareness, so it will automatically find the true core along the length of the thermometer, which is often not where you think it is. So, what temperature? That's up to you. But for a ribeye steak like this, I'm in the 137 club. I think 137 degrees Fahrenheit for a ribeye steak is a temperature where the meat is still really juicy, but the bite is actually more tender and less chewy than medium rare. But you should cook your steak however you like. As for the grill temperature, start at about 300 degrees Fahrenheit. During the initial warming phase, the meat is cold, and you can speed cooking by getting your surface temperature up to the target doneness quickly, which is why I like to start relatively hot. The predictive thermometer is unique in that it measures the temperature just beneath the surface of the meat, and I'll use this measurement to control the reverse sear with sous vide-like precision. If you don't have a predictive thermometer, no worries. Just use an instant read thermometer to periodically poke the surface to check its temperature and adjust things accordingly. Once the surface temperature is close to my target doneness, I'll drop my grill temperature to around 175 degrees Fahrenheit. At this point, the surface temperature of the steak will stall as the tug of war between evaporative cooling and the hot air balances out. But as the surface dries, juices deeper in the steak can't percolate to the surface fast enough to keep cooling the meat. This is when the stall breaks, and you'll notice the surface temperature starts to rise quickly. It's easy to overcook your steak at this point. So I'll drop my grill's temperature a final time to about 10 degrees above my target doneness. In this case, about 150 degrees to hold the surface at about 140 degrees for a nice medium doneness. And now, I wait. The core will steadily climb to the surface temperature, and the meat just beneath the surface won't overcook while I wait. In the end, I'll get a sous vide-like doneness from edge to edge. But unlike sous vide, the surface also dries out and is primed for a great final sear. Now, you could choose a one-and-done cooking temperature like 225 or 250 degrees Fahrenheit, which will obviously work. But a cooking temperature that hot is a compromise for convenience. It makes a lot of sense in a professional kitchen where you need to leave the cooking temperature alone during service. It gets the surface up to temperature and moves through the stall quickly, but meat close to the surface will overcook before the core is up to temperature, and you need to allow for carryover heating too. Personally, when I'm cooking at home, I don't find it that difficult to drop my grill's temperature a couple of times to guarantee a great steak that won't overcook while I'm finishing the rest of the meal. And this brings us to a missing step in the reverse sear. You should let the steak cool before searing. Now, in my last YouTube video, I pissed off about half the internet by showing some carefully collected evidence that proves that resting doesn't keep meat juicier. So that is not the reason I suggest you let the steak cool. No, the reason to let it cool is so that you have more temperature buffer to sear the steak without overcooking it. For a thick steak like this, I'll let the core cool down by at least 10 degrees before searing. For a thinner steak, I'd let it cool 20 degrees. Either way, this will take about 15 to 20 minutes. Again, this isn't very practical in a restaurant, but at home, it gives you plenty of time to get the grill hot and finish dinner. I like to give each side about 30 seconds of searing time before flipping it to the opposite side. Flipping it over lets the hot side rest and lose some of the excess heat through evaporative cooling before I flip it back over to finish the sear. 4 flips in 2 minutes and I'm done. I'll finish my steak by anointing it with some additional beef fat and butter, some fresh ground pepper, a bit of finishing salt, and yes, a squeeze of lemon juice that cuts through the richness of the steak. And then, that is a delicious steak. To recap, start your reverse sear at 300 degrees Fahrenheit and use a thermometer to measure the surface temperature of the meat as it cooks. When the surface temperature gets close to the doneness you want, drop the cooking temperature to 175 degrees Fahrenheit. Then, when the stall breaks and the surface temperature begins to climb, drop the cooking temperature a final time to about 10 degrees Fahrenheit above the doneness you want. And once the steak reaches that doneness, let it cool for 15 minutes or so while you get the grill searing hot. Then just sear it, season it, and enjoy. That's all for today, and thank you so very much for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and a subscribe. Subscribers like you help me make videos like this.